I guess I just have a hard time believing that like the video game review is making any sort of tangible impact on people's lives. Like the highly invested video game media consumer, the kind of person that's listening to this podcast, are they really changing their behavior or becoming enlightened because of the video game review we are so familiar with, the one that comes out 2 days before release? Is that having a transformative effect on me when you see that 7 out of 10? That's completely blowing my mind. It's changing everything. That 7.
I think it all comes down to like answering the question of like, what does a review even do?
A critical error is an error which the OS cannot reasonably ignore. Jake Steinberg is a streamer, writer, and certified yapper. Complimentary. Peter Hunt Szpytek is a YouTuber, journalist, and certified yapper. Derogatory. These are the things they cannot reasonably ignore.
I'm feeling a bit confrontational today.
Oh.
So I think I'm going to start this conversation, this very loaded, charged conversation about video game reviews with a question. Do we believe that the pre-release video game review is criticism? That's where I want to start.
Okay, this is actually a great place to start because I think the question of like, obviously the question that's on the tin of this episode, that's the title of the episode, is like, do video game reviews matter? And I think the very easy answer to that question is, yeah, they do. But I think the more interested and complicated question falls into what you're asking me here about, like, well, what kind of reviews matter though? Because there's all kinds of different reviews. And so the one that I think we think of most often when we are referring to video game reviews are, Jake, what you just described. The review that comes out 2 days before, a week before, sometimes the day the game launches. And do those matter? Are those criticism? That's an interesting question, because I would say, just from like off the dome, I would say largely they are not criticism based on what I have seen. What do you think?
So I think part of the reason why I introduced this conversation as being a little bit confrontational is because I know kind of like how this implication might not sound nice to a lot of people. You and I have both done pre-release video game reviews before. And to say like, hey, this thing, this work that we did, this real work, this thing that we produced is not in what sounds like an almost arbitrary standard of like art making, it doesn't fulfill that quality, can feel mean, it can feel impolite. But I think what's actually happening there is that in the same way that we have standards for our media, we have standards for our art, we need to have standards for our criticism as well.
Yes.
And this only creates sharper, more well-informed criticism. And I think is part of the critical process, having responding to each other in this way. So I don't see this confrontation as, while I do see it as a confrontation, I don't see it as mean-spirited in that way.
It's not a dig, right? It's this idea too of like, I think there's because we have been on the other end of it, of like doing these like pre-release reviews and things like that. I think you and I are positioned to understand the position and perspective of someone having to do that, right?
Yes.
Like, you oftentimes do not have the time to sit down and like really, really chew on a review and stew on a piece of work, because it's like, I got a code for a game and I got a code for a game on Monday, and the embargo was up today. So I was like, I didn't play it because I just fully didn't have the time to do it. But it was this thing where it was like, okay, let's say I was working for a publication that comes in and it's like, okay, Peter, you have to play the game and have a review done by Wednesday. That is like pretty much 48 hours between getting the code and having to have it published and up. And it's this thing where it's like, I understand the position for like, I understand that can push you to maybe not be doing the type of criticism that you would be doing if you were given more time, you know?
Of course, and I think the structural constraints of the, burdened upon games media writer, that is something that is a well-worn path, and it's not necessarily where I feel like taking this particular conversation.
It's not what we're talking about, but I think it's worth addressing to say, like,
Sure.
no, we like there's a side of this that is important and is worth sort of discussing, but that's just not what this conversation is right now.
Right. So when I'm trying to talk about, or at least identify, the difference between the pre-release review and the, maybe the more artful in some ways, or like the critical review,
Yeah.
I think it's worth kind of like identifying what both of these things are and like why they're different.
Yes.
Because. And I think that this will resonate with anybody listening, but like it sounds obvious, but criticism at its core is not consumer guidance. That is something we can all agree with. This should I or should I not buy something? But, and this is like my first kind of like little lesson that I want to impart on the listener, is that by virtue of working within a pre-release embargo, by agreeing to that, by being part of the marketing rollout of a video game, no matter what you write, you are playing into consumer guidance. You are.
Yes.
You are part of that. It does not matter. The structure shapes your message. The way in which your review exists is part of the messaging of the review. I don't care if it is a negative one. You are
right. It's like if you and I were given a code for a game to review, and we drop a review video on this channel that is devoted to writing good criticism and discussing how we talk about games. If we are putting something up at embargo with everyone else, regardless of what that piece of content is, that is still a part of it. And 100%. And it's like, I want to just like be doubly clear here that like that is just definitionally what is happening.
Of course, because the question of should I buy this is what's important. Because even if your answer to that question is no, even if the content of your review is not at all interested in answering the question of should I buy this, by virtue of the fact that it is coming out in the period of time, by virtue of when the publisher decided that was the question that people should be thinking about, you are adhering to the question making. You are adhering to people even thinking, considering if it is something that they should buy by being a part of that organization. And I think that like that is just, I understand that this is like a tall order for a lot of people, that we all want it to come down to this very stupid kind of recursive argumentation in which we are like, well, I'm not biased. Like that whole I'm a video game reviewer that is not biased. You know what I mean?
It's impossible.
I got a review code. I got all of this stuff, but don't worry, my opinion is unscathed. It turns out I actually don't care about your opinion, because that's not what we're dealing with. That's
right.
Not,
it's also less about like whether you are biased or not, or like, and it's to me that question is not particularly interesting, because the answer is of course you are, and that's fine and good, because I'm biased, you're biased. We all have our own biases, right? But it's more about like what incentives are there for you here, you know? And that's the thing that I think is more interesting and more pressing. And I'm not saying even that like most people who are reviewing things, I'm not saying that Ubisoft is giving me a crisp $10 bill to tell you that Star Wars Outlaws 2 is, I'm cheap, is that Star Wars Outlaws 2 is good or whatever, right? Like that's not what I'm like. Of course that's a huge problem, but it's more subtle than that, right? It's the fact that when I was working at blank publication as a freelancer, I reviewed a game. This is true. I gave it a 4 out of 10 because I thought it sucked really bad, and I was told to change it to a 6 out of 10 because that's what the editor-in-chief at that particular website doesn't exist anymore, don't worry, it's fine, wanted, so that there could be a continued PR relationship with that studio.
So again, to kind of continue on this line of logic that is just setting up our definitions so that we are all discussing the same thing, we need to kind of like first arrive at this conversation, I guess, about like what criticism is. So if it's like we've identified the what would you say is like this consumer guide type thing. I would say that criticism is less about answering that question and more an act of interpretation, right? So in a piece of criticism, you are attempting to understand how the text is constructed, what its orientation is towards the world, and what kind of relationships it proposes between the text and the player. a good piece of criticism asks, what is this doing and how is it doing it? And kind of like
Mhm.
the point that you started this conversation with is that I think there's a great like Jay-Z quote I come to all the time when he was talking about music reviews. I
We
think
were
you
talking about
even
like where like albums like come out and people are like reviewing them. They listen to it once and they like write the review, and it's like it just doesn't work like that, right?
Of course, yes,
Yeah.
because the like music and video games and all art, there is a degree to which criticism just requires time and distance, and you need to be able to move from the experience of something to the structure of it, which is hard because in pre-release game reviews, as you were alluding to, I think that a launch review is structurally designed to arrive at the same moment.
Yes.
And it is written under specific conditions. It has all of these things that it must cover because the game is not out yet. It must cover performance,
Mhm.
accessibility, the length, the value, the technical stability. It has to talk about genre conventions and what other games it is like. These are structural implications that a review no longer has after the game is out. These are
Yes.
things that are forced upon the pre-release review.
And I think, my anecdote about like having to change a review score, that is like the most obvious example to me that I've experienced of like pressure from editorial staff. And again, this was like a small website that I think they were trying to pretend they were in a bigger league than they were by being like, well, we have to have these relationships with PR. And I think that in my experience with larger sites, this sort of thing does not happen in that same way because they don't necessarily have those same like concerns, or at least they don't have it. It doesn't happen in that like explicit of a way to be like,
Yeah.
no, you are changing the score right now.
All right.
But I think that like the second, as you're saying, the second you get away from the window of reviews being PR, then I think a lot of those pressures disappear because also most likely the code that you're getting, you probably aren't getting a code. You're probably like buying that either of your own, volition or the website that you're working for gets that code for you. So all of that pressure goes away because there's no relationship there at a certain point,
Of course. And it's funny, it's like even on that point, I just want to be like excessively clear that there is this again, this like very, very lowbrow implication that like, oh, getting the code is influencing what I believe to be like my honest impression of the game. And it's funny, it's like this question of biases and honesty. It's like, no, no, no. I believe that everything you wrote about your experience was honest.
No, of course.
But like, can you have a honest experience and a telling of that honest experience that was also influenced by factors that you are not accounting for?
Right. We
I think
talked about
so.
this once. This is, I think, before we were even doing the pod, when like you and I were like just generally talking about this topic, and we were talking about how 2 years ago at Summer Game Fest, I went and I did a hands-off preview of Assassin's Creed Shadows, and how I was talking to you and I was like, I think a lot of those like flashy things they do for the press like don't necessarily like impress me that much. So like for Assassin's Creed Shadows, they had like a guy who was like on site like making like katanas and like other like ninja weapons and things like that. There was like a seafood buffet, and they had people doing like portrait paintings of people and stuff like that. And it was really cool. But at the end of the day, and this is the point I made to you, I was like, yeah, but at the end of the day, I still wrote kind of a negative preview of the game. And you pushed back on that. And you were like, yeah, but don't you think you had an experience that was unlike the experience that everyone else was going to have when you play that game? It's like, yeah, that
Of
is
course.
true.
And
It is true.
I would even go a step further, and I would say that, and this is one of those things that I think in the space goes undetected.
Mm-hmm.
The heightening of the importance of your voice. Not the
Yes.
fact that you think of something more positively, but the fact that you think what you have to say about this game is valuable at all. And the way that that is built up is by treating you to an experience that is unusual, that is unique from the experience that everybody else is going to have with the game.
Yes.
It is setting the table, you eat the meal, and then you go, well, I didn't like it. It's like, well, you ate the meal,
but
dog.
you still got the meal, right? I still got.
came to the
I
party.
still literally got a meal out of it. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like it's just this understanding of like, okay, but if all of that is true, then is it genuine, real criticism if you're eating the meal to then write about the meal?
Of course, right, and that is the question, right?
Yes.
And I think that somebody who was not invited to the dinner and simply had that meal on their own is their sense of importance and why they're doing something. Suddenly, it's less about the moment, it's less about the context, it's less about something that was built up in their heads about a PR relationship, and that is more about the work. Now, the thing that makes their piece valuable is what they say in it, not the timing, not where they were, and not what they had access to. The importance is placed at the foot of the work. And that is something that I think is so largely ignored in the space, right? Let's talk about this, the importance of the work. Criticism, ideally, enlightens somebody who has already experienced the text.
So this was another thing that I want to hear where you're going with this, but this was another thing that when we were initially talking here about the idea of pre-release reviews, is that usually when you get a code for a game, you are also given review guidelines.
Yeah, of course.
That tell you what you can and can't talk about. And a lot of the times it'll be like, hey, don't mention the event that happens after chapter 3. Or, hey, don't mention the thing after this part in the game. Don't talk about this. And to me, not being able to talk about the work means that you can, if it is up to you to decide what you want to talk about and what you don't want to talk about, great. But if it's up to the company, then it's okay, cool. Then I can't fully do my job. I can't fully really dive into this as criticism, because if we're worried about spoilers, if we're worried about this, that, and whatever, then we can't do it. And so to your point of, I think where you're going to be going with this is it's pre-release reviews, by definition, cannot talk about the work in a way that is going to have people come back to it and go, oh, I understand now. Or, oh, I see the perspective.
It's a question of audience orientation. It's a question of who you're speaking to. And if you are writing a review knowing that your readers cannot have played the game, then you are writing for somebody who, it's like you said, you cannot meaningfully analyze any late game developments without spoiling them. You cannot assume any familiarity with the game or its systems, and you cannot build layered arguments that are in conversation with the shared experience or a wider experience, because there isn't one.
Because
so
also
the
the deepest you can possibly get in a review like this is to say, and I don't want to spoil things, but the ending is satisfying. And it's okay, well then, what are we even doing here?
And then before you even get to that point, you are inundated with paragraphs upon paragraphs that is just kind of an appraisal of the game's elements, an itemization of all of these, because you are talking to somebody who does not know what the game is. There is almost this implication that you must say, hey, there are 6 different shopkeepers that all have this bespoke purpose to them, and all of that comes together in a way that I thought was good. Moving on, and it's it's almost, you are performing the public relations obligation of introducing your audience member to the text, and then after performing that introduction, I introduce you to my cousin Jeremy, and I say, hey, this is Jeremy. They were, oh my god, there's a connection between you two. If you know Brian actually works with Jeremy at the office. And then Jeremy walks away, and then I whisper in your ear, I don't like Jeremy that much. That's pretty much a video game review, 7 out of 10. And I think that's largely how these pre-release reviews are operating. So then if we shift our focus to the kind of critical lens through which reviews typically work in other media, I'm thinking primarily of film criticism, right? A more developed field, some might say.
Yeah.
And the enlightening of somebody who has already experienced the text. When was the last time you read a video game review that reconfigured your memory? What an experience, right?
Yeah. Well, it's also it's interesting too. It's I read video game reviews when they go up, but I think this is the point you're making. So rarely do I go back and read a review once I finished a game, because I know that the review is pretty much just going to tell me what I already know, which is in Silent Hill F, you play as this character and you are running around doing this and whatever. And it's like, oh, yeah, no, I know that because I just did it. You know,
Of
like
course,
I did it.
these are informational artifacts that
Yeah.
are ultimately a part of the marketing cycle, and documents of early reception. And I would say most frequently they are exceptionally well-written summaries, but they are most of the time not sustained acts of interpretation. And I think that
Yeah.
distinction is important, because if we collapse review and criticism into the same thing, I think we ultimately lose sight of what criticism can do. And I really do kind of think that we have seen this already in the video game review space, because something that I was thinking a lot about in leading up to recording this episode is that I actually think social media has had a kind of degenerative effect on the position of the video game reviewer. Most video game reviews, I think, are written from this perspective of fan of the franchise, somebody who is
Yeah, mostly.
informed about video games, plays them, the gamer's perspective, if you will. But the gamer's perspective in that review, they are simply the early access look at what will eventually be consensus among gamers, I would
Mm-hmm.
say. So there's this strange relationship where I think the reviews, however, whatever they mean, however much reviews matter, almost immediately collapses once a game hits social media feeds and you have the much more kind of robust landscape of wide consensus, of wide interpretations, or wide arrivals at if a game is good or bad or whatever it is that's important to people. So this weird thing has emerged where I don't think I really need evidence to support this claim, because I would say, how many times did you, the listener, the viewer, how many times have you gone back to read old video game reviews? How many times have, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think we can all agree that video game reviews in their popularity are spiking on that 2 days before the game is out, whenever they come out at embargo, and then are largely consumed and discarded. And I think the reason for that is because I don't know if we have developed what the video game review is in a way that is particularly distinct or special or different from a player writing a review on Steam.
Well,
Fro-
no, so I think this is sort of what it comes down to, where I'm like, okay, what if we're gonna say that like these pre-release reviews are not criticism, then it's the question, but like, well, then so what are they? And to me, it does feel like they are a lot closer in spirit to something like user reviews, because it is oftentimes it's usually not quite as explicit as that like chart that I'm sure you've seen that gets posted to basically every video game on Steam, that's like graphics 10 out of 10, and then like 3 bullet points about like the vistas were beautiful, the reflections looked good, and the lighting was incredible, gameplay 8. I didn't really like you know what I mean? And it's, of course, that's like such a silly way to break down a video game, and you see that very often in things like Steam reviews and whatever. But what makes me pause a little bit when reading a lot of reviews that go up pre-release on publications, things like that, is a lot of them do kind of boil down to that, but just a little fancier. Which,
yeah,
that to me is not, that's like an assessment of like, that's an assessment of detail. That's not like criticism, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately what it kind of boils down to is that as artists, I think that there is a responsibility to develop the form and develop the kind, the level of work should be heightened in these spaces in a way that is, completely almost unrecognizable from somebody popping off a few tweets about what they think of a game, right?
Yes. I really like. Are you familiar with Big Joel on YouTube.com?
You've mentioned Big Joel before, and the Clips channel, Little Joel.
Yes, Little Joel is very good.
I always think Little Joel first. I think it's funny. Yeah.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
But so Big Joel will do. He does a lot of like political commentary and stuff like that. But then also sometimes he will do like a breakdown of his feelings on different media stuff, whatever. And he got a question once because sometimes he'll answer like Patreon questions or whatever. By the way, patreon.com/criticalerror. Anyway. Where he will answer some questions, and once someone asked him like, how important is it to provide a summary when you are reviewing a piece of work or whatever?
What a question.
And his answer was so absolutely inspirational to me. And he basically said, I tried to summarize as little as possible.
Yeah.
I try, because he's like, it's a waste of time, because you either know what I'm talking, you've already like, done the reading, or, done the work, watched the thing, played the game, whatever, and are watching this, or you haven't, and you know that. And if I start talking about something you don't understand, you should go do it, or you just don't care and you're just interested in the discussion about the thing. And so it's like the summary doesn't matter at all. And so when I think about like what game reviews should be and how we're talking about like returning to something after you've played it, usually you don't want it to be a summary. You don't want it to just, and I'm not even just talking about plot, right? I'm talking about like a summary of mechanics, a summary of setting, and all that sort of stuff. And to me, the best advice that I have received as a critic was in that Patreon question that he answered, where he's like, just don't. It's not important.
How do we face this existential question that I think a lot of people want to ignore, which is the fact that so much of video game reviews as they exist now function in almost entirely out of a chronological advantage around the fact that we hear it all the time in our spaces.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of like having to do the work that you don't want to do under these timelines, blah blah blah. Every job has this kind of pressure, and I don't think people in games media have it to any kind of heightened degree over anybody else. But the fact that this product in actuality is to be honest, I've heard conflicting reports about this, how much reviews are even a driver to these websites to begin with. But this kind of like, if we cannot get a review out at embargo, it is not even worth doing, because ultimately at the end of the day, we are here for clicks, and to get those clicks, we need to do this. How do you face that kind of existential question, or maybe pushback?
So it's interesting. So my experience with that has been mixed and varied, and also highly dependent on who, what, where, when, and why. So
right.
it's when you said like you've heard conflicting information, my time in games media has given me conflicting information, because there have been websites that I have been like explicitly told, hey, if the review is not going up in embargo, don't do it.
Right.
Because they're like, that is when the largest, that's when it becomes actually worth it. I've also been told, I've been at a website when it was purchased a few times, and there was a conversation of they totally killed us doing reviews, the new owners, because they were like, it's a lot of time and money, and it does not have a return. But the big pushback was, we are a video game website. This is expected. Do you know what I mean? Like that was the pushback
Sure.
from editorial, was to the management, was like, it is expected that this is on our video game website, regardless of whether or not it is a large traffic driver for us.
Right. For me, my experience was this review is going to take a little bit longer than you might like. So, okay, kill the review. Instead, we'll do a review discussion where you're just kind of talking. Yeah.
And then the other part of it is like for me on like YouTube, and YouTube is a different beast because it's not, it's Google owned, but it's not dealing with like the Google algorithm of like Google search and whatever, but it's, still dealing with algorithmic things and whatever. I have found that when I talk about things that are relevant and happening, I usually do much poorer in terms of like reach and views and stuff than I do for things that are completely irrelevant but packaged well.
You don't say.
Yeah.
You don't say.
Well,
It's almost like chronological advantage is fragile. It's almost like if that is what we are pursuing, we are creating a space in games media that itself is fragile. It is fraught with potential errors that can be immediately destroyed on a whim, simply because we are not proud of our work.
Well, it's this thing that I just find it to be like a short-sighted look into I think it can be a short-sighted way to drive clicks and to drive audience and stuff like that, because sometimes it works, right? I think there are certain websites that people go to because they're interested in their reviews. I think a website like IGN, the reviews that are going up on IGN, I bet are doing fucking gangbusters, because IGN is a established major publication, right? To me, that is, when I think of like the default games website, IGN.com, congratulations, you've won, and it's not even close. Right?
Well, but I would also say I think a lot of that has to do simply with search engine optimization.
Also, yes,
and I would say that some of that is to be a little brash. Some of that is a little illegitimate due to the fact that IGN, the ownership of IGN, has been buying up their search engine competitors.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. But
so that's just a fact. Like that's just
yes.
Yeah.
But like what I'm getting at though is like IGN, it is absolutely worth to continue doing reviews. If I had to guess, I've not seen their back end or whatever, but if I had to guess, I think the reviews are doing just fine. But when it comes to like smaller publications, it is a question about like, okay, we're not going to beat the top 8 people who are on the Google search.
Okay,
so
yeah, sure.
what do we do? So what do we do? We have to have like other reasons to come to our website and other things to do, right? And I think a lot of independent publications or independent like just media organizations, right, like podcasts and things like that, have figured like, okay, well, we're not going to do a review. Instead, we're going to shift and put our time and effort into this other place where we might be able to get the edge out on these larger publications. I think about like people like Giant Bomb. For the longest time, they didn't do written reviews. For like 6 years, they stopped doing it. Obviously, they had different, whatever with management and everything like that. But they shifted focus and said like, okay, the reviews, we're gonna focus on doing them in the podcast form and have them be the driving force in a lot of our podcast discussions and stuff like that. And so I think that's a smart way to get around it. But then the question also is that criticism?
And not developing the medium, I'll tell you that. And I think that that's kind of the conversation that I'm interested in right now.
Sure.
Because there is something I would say strange about the proliferation of these kind of independent video games outlets that, in achieving their independence, strive to become an almost exact replica of the business as usual corporate way of running their organizations and producing their content. There was a fantastic interview between Autumn Wright and Austin Walker in Unwinnable that just came out of the day of recording. And it kind of laid this question bare, right? This idea of if you are independent, in theory, the people that support you, your audience, the people that listen to you, they are there for you and your perspective. And choosing to participate in all of these kind of in all of this like corporate infrastructure is all of a sudden this like very funny premise to me, because it is just replacing ownership of one group with ownership of another group. And I don't 100% know where that where kind of like the desire to do that comes from. And I think that like all of these groups existing and doing whatever they want to do is completely fine. But I think the issue becomes, if we see the continued death of games media in the mainstream, if we see this be something that in perpetuity has the reputation of the burdened upon games media writer where everything is so difficult and they can lose their job like that, as if that's not the case for many people in many different industries. But if we are to see that reputation continue, at what point do we need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves a hard question about the value of the thing that we are producing? Because again, chronological advantage, being able to come out with the review first, the access journalism, that is an advantage and it does have value, but it is fragile, because the moment the public gains access, the moment that there is fan consensus, that eclipses the critics' representational role immediately. We have brought it up a few times on this podcast, but that is because it is a good example. Look at the reviews for Borderlands 3, and then look at how everybody talked about Borderlands 3 after in the lead up to the launch of Borderlands 4. The fan consensus eclipsed the critics' representational role. And it's this thing where when you are providing this very specific kind of review that is kind of trying to be the oracle of consensus for all of these people, for the consumers, then your role will be supplanted the second everyone else gets their hands on the game. So what can you do that they cannot? Can we answer that question?
This is that thing, right? So you're talking about like all of these sort of independent publications that have popped up, and that's great, and happy that all of those people have been able to find work doing what they want to be doing. But there is this like sort of interesting common refrain we would hear when a lot of these were starting up, I don't know, 3-ish years ago, of this like, okay, cool, now we can actually do our own thing. And a lot of times doing our own thing is doing what we were doing before, but it now, again, what you're saying, but now the ownership has changed into the hands of the people doing it. And hey, that's great, that's good. I'm always happy for that to happen. But then when you look at the work, the question is, but what purpose does this work serve? And here's the thing. I think that like, I do think it is important to note that I don't know if all of these places are looking to do criticism. Do you know what I mean? Like, because you don't have to. And if you are fine doing the more generalized like review discussions on podcasts and things like that, and that's what the work is for your publication and for your organization, whatever you want to call it, that's great and that's fine. But I do think that it is important that we do recognize and that we try to address the fact that a lot of the times the criticism is not actually being done, and it's a different sort of thing. So I have a question for you about this, Jake.
Please.
For me, what would be most helpful is if we just had a different word for this. Do you know what I mean? The fact that when we say like video game reviews, criticism, and these like more like product reviews is kind of like what I might call them, but I still think that it feels kind of inaccurate. It gets lumped into one sort of like umbrella. Is there a specific word or like distinction that you would make between the ideas of like someone who's sitting down to do a like art criticism of a game versus someone who is sitting down and doing a like pre-release review or something like that?
Of course, yeah. I would say that, man, I really like the kind of consumer guide. I think that makes I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I think that there is I mean, I almost have like more academically slanted things for what's going there, but I don't know how to confess these thoughts without appearing just ultimately dismissive, or the terms themselves kind of lending it to because it's consumer advisory is what it is. That's just
but a consumer guide I actually do kind of like, because I also think it's this thing where like then people are able to engage with it how they like, and if they are someone who's like, oh, I do want to know what's going on with the latest, I don't know, the Resident Evil, right? That's coming out at the end of this month. I want to know what's going on with the latest Resident Evil. I want advice on if I should buy it or not. Consumer guide, perfect. But then it's like, oh, I want to figure out if Leon is
To be completely honest with you, there's a part of me that in my head, I see every review that comes out as like a in quotes pre-release review, and I don't see it as I see it as a different product. And I guess you could replace the word review with assessment if that made you comfortable. But
sure,
like there's just like a difference for me between the access review, between this kind of disjointed, almost trying to have a objective analysis of what is going on with this video game, that's trying to paint its impressions in the broadest strokes possible for the sake of orienting the audience, and not necessarily for performing like a critical evaluation of the review itself.
So let me throw this to you then again as well. So like, let's say you and I are going to be let's say Critical Error, the podcast, is going to do a review of a game, and we get access to it pre-release. Do you think that we fall in then, by definition, as we were talking about earlier in this episode, by definition fall into consumer guidance?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. I just don't think it matters like what you say at that point. And the fact of the matter is that I think you can fall within that and find different degrees of
certainly.
of developing the medium, and like even just having like a critical framework, or being thesis driven and having like existential questions. There are obviously like layers to this that can be performed to different degrees of success. There is obviously more of a critical perspective in the review that is written than the podcast that is discussed live. That is just true.
Because it's structured, right? And it's a little bit more thoughtful. And that's not to say that a podcast can't be thoughtful. I think we're trying to be thoughtful here, right? But it is this idea of like, if I get to sit down and be incredibly precise with my words, and I don't have to, I'm not building the track as we're on the train, right? If we get to do the whole thing and have it all point to different things and whatever, that is, I think by definition, more thoughtful.
Intentional. Part of the
intentional.
Part of the kind of agreement between a reader and its text is that you are kind of making an assumption that there is meaning to the choices that were made, and there is, even if the person who made the choices doesn't know. There is meaning.
Yeah.
And I think when you are performing criticism, you are making a piece of art yourself, and you need to be just as intentional as the thing that you are criticizing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you are not performing criticism. You're doing something else. And there must be a difference between performing criticism and giving your opinion on something. There must be a difference. We must be able to isolate that difference. You do not perform criticism just by criticizing, just by proclaiming your opinion in a blue sky skeet.
Yeah.
We must recognize that there is an art form at play here. And you can obviously write reviews without participating in the critical art form. I'm not going to stop anybody from doing that. Almost every single video-focused games media outlet is doing this right now. Now, but when I see a podcast that's called New Game Out This Week Review, do I really click on that video thinking that what I am getting is a review? Absolutely not. And I think that there is a degree to which, if I'm talking about the development of the form, that this kind of work goes in the opposite direction, and it dilutes the form.
Because it's this thing where like writing, like let's just stick with Resident Evil. Resident Evil 9 consumer guidance discussion, not sexy, and it is not the thing that people are clicking on, right? Because they are looking for, it's a review discussion, right? Because it is people who've played the game. Ostensibly, they are trying to review it by having a conversation about it. But to what you're saying, because it cannot be as precise as something that as a like written review that someone is sitting down to discuss and perform criticism, then it is something that is kind of nebulous in terms of. And I get why they do it, right? Because it's
yes, but we just need to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah,
and the fact of the matter is that when you put your content on YouTube in the way that we are putting our content on YouTube right now, part of the rhetorical agreement between us and the audience member is that there's a parasocial element at play.
Right.
That is not quite the same when you write a review pen to paper. And there is something here about, at the very beginning of this episode, I nodded to kind of like the most engaged video games person who's like listening to a video game podcast. There is something participatory about gamer culture, about being a fan of video games that you are feeding in this content. Because that's what this is. It is content, which is a companion to kind of like, or maybe a panacea to the depression that we are all facing in our day-to-day lives.
Right.
So and that's okay. And I think we need to be able to face that. And I guess I say that like I am aware that this podcast, that what we are doing right now is not criticism. I guess I just don't have any like self-consciousness in saying that, but I do kind of sense that self-consciousness across the entire, as it stands right now, kind of like games media landscape. And I think that there is this constant emphasis on precarity that is that people have decided to you could deploy in a way to protect themselves, because I think that these narratives that surround games media have calcified into an identity, and then the identity is just a constant excuse not to do more meaningful work.
Do you think part of it comes from the idea that like games are, I would say, largely not taken seriously as works of art? Would you say that's accurate?
That's accurate.
In the general population, most people don't look at games. Not saying that most people don't think games are works of art, but aren't taken seriously as works of art.
That's accurate.
And I think that there is a certain level of insecurity, and I understand this to a certain extent, of like, or maybe not insecurity, but insistence then from anyone who's reviewing a game as being like, no, you are to take me seriously. Because I want to be taken seriously. I get it. But I do think that in needing to assert that all the time, I think it means that there is a certain amount of insecurity that is built up from doing that, of saying like, you need to take me seriously. And if the second that it's like, okay, right, but like, let's actually talk about what you're doing. Let's talk about like the definitions of what this is and this, that, and whatever. And to say like, I don't think this is criticism. This is a different thing. I think there is a certain level of like, defensiveness maybe that comes out from that. And I understand where it's coming from. And I think you could throw that at me and I might feel the same way, on any given day. But I think there's a level of defensiveness about it because of the way that games are treated as a whole that might be coming into play. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and I actually want to clarify something a step further, because when we talk about this kind of like games are not treated seriously as an art form, I think in our heads we imagine somebody who just doesn't get it, who doesn't get it, who doesn't know about the wide breadth of games. And I want to clarify something, because again, I think that there's something a little bit uncomfortable here that's important to be honest about. I think that even people who say they take games seriously as art often I don't believe them, because they don't take criticism seriously as an art form. And I think if you took video games seriously, you would have a more curious nature about the art of criticism, about like the tools in which you can excavate games for meaning, about structured arguments and ethical positioning, aesthetic coherence and incoherence. And I think that if you are going to treat games as something that is important, something that rewards interpretation, that interpretation itself has to matter. Because in literature, in film, in fine art, criticism is not treated as an accessory for the consumer. Right. And it's like this really crazy thing where I think well, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to convince somebody who wants to write about video games for a living, who wants to call themselves a video game critic? Why is it so hard to convince this person to read Susan Sontag or Roland Barthes? Like, why is criticism treated as an afterthought and not as generative? Because I think even among smart people, even among well-meaning people in the game space, criticism is treated as ornamental. It's an extra thing. It's a cool little, oh my God, look at what they managed to do here. It's not necessary.
You know what I bet part of the reason why of that is, and I think this comes back to something that we sort of mentioned at the top here. I think a part of that comes down to the structure of what the jobs are, right? Where like, what's a website? GameSpot.com is not hiring, hey, we're hiring a games critic. They're hiring a writer who can do guides and news and previews and reviews and, you know what I mean? Like all of these things. And so I think that there is a little specialization that gets to happen in the field. And I think that is potentially part of it, right? And I think everyone wants to be a games critic and everyone wants to review video games because, hey, at the end of the day, it is also, in my opinion, a fun thing to do. I like to review games. Because you get to play a game, then you get to talk about it and like write down your feelings about it. That's a fun thing to do. But it is this thing where like, yes, but are you trying to take that next step and become a critic who is as intentional, as thoughtful as you want to be? And I think oftentimes that sort of stuff gets sidelined a little bit.
But this again comes back to this question of what we value and what we think is important, and kind of the evidence as seen in these independent outlets that then do not pursue this as well. And I think what we are missing out on is creating an audience member who cares about these things. We are missing out on the opportunity of developing an audience member that cares about a higher level of criticism, because you have not introduced that person to the ecstasy of discovering a piece of writing that transforms your vision for what a game was. And because you have not done that, you are instead victim to, prisoner of your own design to these like systems that prioritize speed and the schedule and the grind and all of this other stuff to the point that it has killed your imagination and you go off to an independent outlet and that's all you can do anyways. And it's
a chicken or the egg, right? About like, okay, we're talking about these videos that go up that are like, oh, it's game review discussion, and it's like, is that a review? The answer is kind of no, but it's also like, but people who are clicking on the video aren't going to click on it unless it says review in it. And it's like,
right.
Well, why are they doing that? Well, it's because we've trained them to think that this is what it is. Well, why are we doing that? Because they're clicking on it, right? And it's this like sort of endless thing, and it is a difficult cycle to break out of because of the nature of the industry, and because if you are trying to break that cycle, I think you're going to see a weird shift in your audience that might be concerning to you. Do you know what I mean? And it might drive people away, but it's at first, but then if you spend the time to really like grow an audience who's interested in this sort of thing and whatever, like they might come back, but that takes time. And like, I get all of that. And it's one of those things that I think is it's an interesting place to be in for the industry, because it feels like in hindsight we can look at it and go like, oh yeah, I see how this happened like this, but it's difficult to know how do you break out of this cycle.
Well, of course, and I think like the cycle is such an important thing to really interrogate, because when you look at what is going on in other mediums, how many times have you been talking about a game, or maybe written something about a game, and maybe the viewer will connect to this, the listener. You're reading too much into it.
Oh, have you been reading my YouTube comments lately?
Oh, okay, see, this is a familiar refrain to a lot of people.
Oh, is it? Yes.
And I think in every other art form, we simply accept that reading too much into it is the
job.
point. And that this lack of curiosity about criticism as a craft, I think it tells you something about how we are implicated in this, have positioned the medium. Because if we truly believed that games were capable of complex expression, we would be hungry for criticism that helps us see that complexity, and we would be more willing to argue over interpretations. We would like, something that is so interesting to me, right, is this like emphasis on consensus and chronology, both things that we have talked about in this episode. But like, you see immediately how when a big video game says we're not going to give out review codes, the assault on the critic that this is. And I think like last year there was, again, I'm kind of pulling from this Autumn Wright interview with Austin Walker, there was this interesting thing that went down in like the most like, you are in games media space, where someone wrote something about Hollow Knight Silksong, and then a different author at a different publication was like, I think you're wrong about this. And then that first one wrote another piece going, actually, you're wrong. And
it's good. It's good.
And it was this funny thing where I think this is largely the point, and this is the evidence of an active critical sphere in which people are engaging and arguing with each other's interpretations and ideas. And hey, that game did not have pre-release reviews.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. The one time that this emerged in recent memory is with a game that did not give this easy way out for everyone, and the work had to be the thing that was important. And I think that's worth looking at. And I think you could look at a show, you could look at something like Critical Error, and it would be so easy for you to think that we're just like taking shots at people that are doing their jobs. It would be so easy to say, we're looking across the aisle and saying, your job isn't that hard, but we're not doing the work ourselves, even though I guess you and I both do the work. That's neither here nor there. That's neither here nor there. Put that aside for a moment. But I think what's important here is that we are at least trying to generate the kind of discourse that criticism should be generating.
Yes.
The fact that reviews come and go, no one has anything to say. Like, at least we're trying to engage in a conversation that might make a blip on somebody's radar and go, oh, nobody else is talking about this. And that is what it looks like to develop the medium.
To inspire, you know what I mean? And have people say like, hey, isn't it weird that this happens in the industry like this? Isn't it odd that like games writing is so consumable and easy to just like toss away? And it's like, Yeah, that's I don't know.
Push back against anyone that is being complacent in any field. Anybody that is acting like video games video game reviews are these consumable products. Put the review in the bag. Shut up. It's on you for wanting more out of this. Push back against that person because they are dead wrong and history will prove you right. Man, when we talk about all these websites and stuff, I think something that we miss is the love of the game.
Yeah.
And I really, really hope that whoever's listened to this long of this podcast, the person who, they've loved video games for however long, they love talking about video games, I hope that they can recognize the inherent art in talking about a thing that you love or bringing somebody through in a storytelling way, an experience that you had to widen their worldview. And I hope that this person can understand that this is not at all dissimilar from the guitar player going to the open mic.
Yes.
Honing their skill.
Yes.
Trying to get better. And I would never look at that guitar player and I would never say, for you to get better, for you to make a wider field in your art, you need a job paying you to do the thing that you want to do. I would never do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all understand that. I think that is something we all understand. And I'm tired of the excuses. Yeah.
Jake, I love your passion. I do.
Good.
Can I tell you something I'm passionate about?
Oh my God, please.
The Critical Error Nation. Patreon.com/critical error. You can become a part of our nation. I would like to give a big shout out to members of the Jake and Peter tier at patreon.com/critical error. That is Andrew Bolkar, Evan Snee, Mayro, and Robert Quesada. Thank you very much. These are people donating financially to us. It means the entire world to us at the highest tier on our Patreon. This past week, or I guess as you're hearing this right now, there's an episode, the first episode of the Critical Error Book Club. We read a book, or read half of it so far. We're reading the next half for next week. Jake, can I be honest with you? This week's episode of the Critical Error Bonus Pod, my favorite one. My favorite one we've ever done.
I hear you. That was that was, I got off that call and was literally like, that fed a part of my life that I didn't know I needed. Here's the thing. You want to talk about how, doing a review, you play the game, then you need time to like sit back and like process it and whatever. You would not believe the new insights that I've gained since we talked about it. Because I had read the passages I needed to read, and then we sat down with you, started talking about it, whatever. And like, now I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to go back and read all that again. Yes,
like, I've got new thoughts about it, new things I've noticed.
Great art holds up to multiple readings. That's how it goes. Yeah.
Heating and Cooling by Beth Ann Fenley. That is what we are discussing this week and next week on the Critical Error bonus show. If you're interested in that, patreon.com/critical error. Jake.
Wait, but there's a little thing going on.
Yeah, please.
So not only if you join at patreon.com/critical error do you get access to the next entry in the book club next week, but for our written piece, which we will get to for this episode in a moment, next week's written piece, Peter and I are both going to bring something. So this is a book of micro memoirs. And Peter and I have decided that we will be writing our own micro memoirs to share on the podcast. But in the next bonus pod, we will be reading and delighting and sharing the micro memoirs of our patrons. So if you've got a little itch to do some writing yourself, patreon.com/critical error, going to be treating it like in my professional life, I run some creative writing workshops, going to kind of be taking that approach to some of the submissions for anybody that feels like getting in. So again, big couple of weeks over on the Patreon. We're doing some fun stuff.
It's been so fun this year specifically. Obviously we're only into February, but we've already done all sorts of like community stuff. We did our Animal Crossing community night, which was so fun, and the book club has been cool, and it's been interesting reading what people are saying about it already in the Discord and everything like that. All of that you get access to patreon.com/critical error. Jake, we would be remiss if we did not mention the members of Critical Error Royalty. Is my understanding you've made a sound effect for them?
Of course I made the sound effect. So I think for this episode, it would be appropriate to, I'm gonna probably group them into groups of 3. And then I'm gonna give them a review.
Oh, that's
I'm gonna give them just a quick review, a little score. I think everybody's gonna get. So it's like three members of the royalty. They make up a video game, and then I will kind of give you the bumper sticker statement. So.
Sure.
Let's hear our critical error review roundup right now. Thank you to our critical error patrons. Our first game comes from Andrew Bolkar, Robert Quesada, and Connor Truelove, a fighting game with 100 characters. But not enough character. 5.4 out of 10. Our next game, Ansel Trait, Sam Woods, and Kale Chow. A flight sim so overcomplicated it has you wishing you flew coach. 6.3 out of 10. Next, we've got Pinky Oats, Jared Cousineau, and Thick Dick Mystic, a live service with 9 battle passes, and somehow they're all worth it. 8.6 out of 10. Next, Mitch Dyer, Shin, Brianna Bossman bring us a sprawling RPG with 200 side quests. Bloated? Yes, but who doesn't love a muffin top? 9.1 out of 10. James Pierre Reed, Evan Snee, and Cole bring us a quiet indie game about depression. 10 out of 10. And finally, Mayro, Danny Disaster, and Jacob Richter bring us a battle royale featuring cereal mascots. 7 out of 10. Peter, as I alluded to earlier, every single week we trade off. We read a little pre-written piece. We love to bring that element to the more off-the-cuff kind of discussion of the podcast. So what will you be sharing with us this week?
So I would like to give a quick trigger warning. I don't think this is particularly nasty, but it is my understanding that other people feel differently about it. I'm going to be discussing being in a hospital. I'm going to be discussing wounds and stitches, not in any graphic detail, in my opinion. But if that is something that you are sensitive to or bothered by, I want to give you the heads up of that right now. If you are bouncing, thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you in the next one. If not, here goes.
Hey, take it away.
The first thing I notice is just how young she is. We are finished in the ER. My wife has just received 10 or maybe 11 stitches in her thumb. I know I should know, but I just can't listen to what anyone is saying as my mother-in-law gives my wife her hoodie because I'm listening to this girl scream. She's maybe 8 or 9. I can't quite make out what's happening over there. I'm still a little dazed from the afternoon. The doctors gave me so much information about what I'm supposed to do, how I'm supposed to care for my wife's wound. I am underqualified and not all there. And then there's this girl. The first thing I noticed is how little I can identify inside her hand. I'm finishing up my day at work. Elena came home and she told me she's going to start working on dinner. But before I can get into the kitchen to help her, I hear a yelp. A single curse word breaks the afternoon air, and then more yelping, which turns into pleading. I am up from my desk and in the kitchen, and then I see it. I guess I don't know what I see. It's not good, I think. There's a mess of flesh, and maybe it's a bone or a tendon or something that was once hidden beneath pristine, pale skin that is now occupying the same space as our eyes. I have touched the spaces between her fingers an infinite number of times, but now the space between her thumb and first finger is unknowable. I don't know how long I froze. Elena says it was half a second. It felt like half a year before we are wrapping her hand in a green dish towel. I watch color drain from her face and pour into the fabric. No coats, no keys, no bags. I am running her into the car wearing shorts. It's 7 degrees outside. I haven't showered since Monday. It's not good, I think. It looks good, I tell her. The girl is being held by her mother. Or maybe it's someone else. I'm trying not to listen to her screaming. I'm trying to hold onto the falling action of the evening so that today can simply be over. I look over at the check-in desk where the girl came in. She's not hurt. She's wrapped in this woman's arms as a boy who looks like her brother stands next to them silently. He's younger than her, I think. It's hard to tell with kids. The pair are the pictures I've seen of city disasters where fallen buildings crumble to dust and smoke directly across the block from ones that stand untouched by the rubble. I wonder what it's like to be inside those buildings, looking across the street at the wreckage. Are you supposed to just work? How many stitches can even fit into one thumb, I ask myself as I watch a young nurse, or maybe she's a doctor, lay my wife down on a hospital bed in the middle of the hallway. I'm in the way. I'm standing next to a giant printer. There's nowhere to be that isn't in front of a door or in the path of someone in scrubs hurrying somewhere. A woman is sick in the room across the hall. Phones are ringing. The printer goes off and scares me half to death. How can this nurse or doctor or whoever she is tune it all out and take care of my wife? I'm watching her squirm and yelp as they numb her hand as my mother-in-law pets her head, glancing down and going white herself at the sight of the wound. Can you take these off her? She speaks sternly at me. I blink and look over at the hand, now cleaned and ready for stitches, save for one detail. I reach over and touch the hand I've touched countless times. It is cold and wet. My wife can't look at me as I pull her pristine, new wedding band off her hand. The ring sits heavy in my palm. My hand balls into a fist as it goes into my pocket. The ring is cradled in my calluses. I'm not letting go. She's going to be fine. This is not a big deal. 9 or 10 or 11 or however many stitches is a lot, but once this is over, we will meet up in the lobby and go home. The night will be over. I finally understand what's going on. She just watched her father die. The woman is fighting an uphill battle trying to convince the girl that everything is okay while they check into the ER, while they find a place they can crash land in a chair or maybe on the floor, or who even cares. The girl's brother knows she's right, and so does the woman. She puts on a pitiful performance of comfort as the girl screams in detail about what she just saw. And I am standing on the other side of the glass. Elena's ring is in my pocket. We get to go home now. I'm still in shorts. We left the dish towel there. It was too soaked in blood to bring home with us, but after I get Elena settled down on the couch, I have to clean the kitchen. I take the ring out of my pocket and I put it in a dish next to our sink. It looks up at me, stunned at being returned to the site of the tragedy. The water is running. As I wash the knife that brought us here, I reach for the towel, but its absence surprises me and pulls me out of the intense focus I've been sitting in for the last 4 hours. I think of the girl, and I cry. Thank you.
Wow, a true short story.
Yeah.
Yeah, a true short story. Like that was a very classic structure, I think, to like how a short story works, which I was not expecting. That's not typically what you go for.
No, to be honest with you, the last handful of pieces I've done, I've kind of been like, I feel like I'm leaning into the same sort of like beats. And that's okay because, you know, this is meant to be sort of like an exercise and whatever. But it's like, if this is an exercise, let me do something new. And I'm trying to process this. This happened and it was weird and upsetting, of course, you know, and there's a certain level of processing that's been done over the past few weeks as I've been sort of dealing with this and sort of thinking back on this night. And the thing that really stuck out to me is obviously this girl.
Right.
And I don't know, you know, last week we were talking about your piece about how it's like, I don't do sadness. Mm-hmm. And when I sat down to write this, I've been working on this since it happened, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. But I didn't want it to just be a bummer. But then when I finished it, I was like, but I think not that it's not intended to be a bummer. It's just what happened, you know? And I was struggling on figuring out if I needed a different angle, if it needed to go on and have some sort of like larger message or something like that. But I don't know if it does.
There is a great short story that you should read that this really reminded me of. It's called The Chicxulub. And it's a tough name. So, but for the listener, it's CHICXULUB. Yes. By T.C. Boyle. And it's a story that I use in my creative writing classes to teach the concept of an objective correlative. And this idea of, you know, the story centers around this, if I'm remembering correctly, this married couple who goes to the hospital because their daughter has been in like a car accident. And every so often, kind of like on the journey from their house to the hospital, whatever, the story interrupts itself to tell you the story of the Chicxulub, which, if I'm remembering correctly, is the meteor that destroys the dinosaurs. And you're getting these two stories in tandem. And or maybe actually now I just revealed what that meteor actually was in remembering how the story worked. But you know, kind of the twist of the story is that you just think this couple thinks the most devastating thing in the world has happened to them.
Yes.
And you're getting this story that, again, you think is about a history altering, you know, defining event of just like this devastating thing. And then, you know, it turns out that the daughter is fine. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think that maybe the meteor just floats by. And it's this funny moment where it reminded me a lot of the kind of the movement that was happening in your story when you revealed kind of learning what that little girl was there for, and kind of speaking to one, you know, talking about one thing while this other thing is happening, these parallel events, and how they're kind of like in conversation with each other. And I think that this draft that you presented is like already really strong, and I would like really be curious to see like the third draft, just because it's there's like a lot of, just by your instincts, I think a lot of like literary elements already baked in to kind of how you positioned everything. But
Well,
yeah,
it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned that short story, because I mean that's basically what it is. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like I think it's so bad, and then it's not that it wasn't, but it's fine. She's gonna be fine. She's not losing her thumb or whatever. I thought it was really fucking bad, and it wasn't. And that, but like I get to go home. You know what I mean? Like we leave, and that's it.
Let me read you a little piece from the story. The thing that disturbs me about Chicxulub, I don't even think I'm saying that right, but aside from the fact that it erased the dinosaurs and wrought catastrophic and irreversible change, is the deeper implication that we, in all our work and worries and attachments, are so utterly inconsequential. Death cancels out our individuality. We know that, yes, but ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Oh my god. And the kind goes on. Human life and culture succeed us. That, in the absence of God, is what allows to accept the death of the individual. But when you throw the Chicxulub into the mix, or the next Chicxulub, the Chicxulub that could come howling down to obliterate all and everything, even as your eyes skim the lines of this page, where does that leave us? And then it cuts to, you're the parents? ? And we're back in the hospital. Like that's what it is. Like that's it. Like that's So, God. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
God, hate going to the hospital as a setting. Pretty much in any.
Pretty much always bad.
Always bad.
I'm always
already
bad.
I got a little white coat syndrome, I would say. So I even hear hospital and I'm just like, oh no.
Oh no, she has a similar feeling as you. And so it's funny too. I cut some stuff because I was going to talk about. This is our second time of me taking her there. Right. We live, but we're very fortunate. We live like 2-3 minutes away from the hospital, like literally right around the corner. And this is the second time that we took her there, because the first time she passed out, had a seizure when I was driving her home, and it was this thing where then, in taking care of her and going to the hospital and everything like that, it was a lot of flashbacks to that, and how that was freaky. And I had a bit about it in here, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
I wanted to hone it and make it more focused and clean and whatever. But
yeah. Cool.
Thank you for listening to this. And hey, I would love to see you over at patreon.com/criticalerror. If not, would love a subscription on YouTube here. It's free to subscribe.
Wow, I didn't even think about that. We never ask about that. We never ask. Can you believe that? Oh my God. All right. I mean, listen, there's never been a better time. Patreon.com.
Never been a better time.
Never been a better time. Give me one more. Give me
Never been a better time.
Never been a better time.